and his career has taken him in some like really surprising and awesome places. So I'm assuming everyone here knows that we have a UX concentration in sociology here that we are in the process of growing, and so this is the first speaker we've had who speaks specifically about UX. But anyway, that's it. So welcome.
Thank you, Brent. Hey everyone, glad to be here and give this presentation. I wanted to start off, so the title here is Going Beyond Academic Careers Using Anthropology and UX Research. I won't talk too much about anthropology actually, but I'm an anthropologist, so I think that's where you'll get that from, right? But I talk about it a little bit. But first, I would like, if anyone would like to take a quick survey, feel free to take out your phone, fill out the survey. It's very short. Faculty as well, if you'd like, because I'm asking a question about faculty also. Just because I just want to know a little bit more about your understanding of UX. But since there's a UX course, I think you all have a pretty good understanding. So, but still, I want to know, you know, because it's very career focused, right? And so I also want to know a little bit about your understanding of salaries and such, because that's going to be really important. And like if you're talking with faculty as well about career options outside of academia. And yeah, so please feel free to fill it out. If you like, answer any questions you want to or don't want to, all good. Okay, so basically I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit, talk about a little bit about my background and like how I got here. Also talk a little bit about what is user experience. I'll pause in case there are folks who are not in the UX course, and if you have any clarifying questions, I'll just pause real quick. We could talk a little bit, then we'll continue, and then I'll give a case study of using UX in the environmental sciences field and like how that kind of looked like, just as a case study. And then that's basically most of this like formal lecture. But then I want to talk about what's called like the UX career ladder. It's just like a slide that shows a lot of really cool information that was collected back like in a couple years ago in 2024, but it's still really, really valuable. And then a key summary of everything. And then if there's some time, either a working session, if there's not much of time for a working session, I want to show just how it looks like when you're collaborating in a business using a online digital whiteboard. Yeah, so let's go ahead and begin. This is me, right, and I'm here. Starting next week, I'm starting a new job with Advent Health, which is like a hospital group. They're opening one up in one of the town burgs here in North Carolina, somewhere. They're opening a new hospital here, and yeah, so I work in UX. Sometimes you'll hear like terms like product strategy, services, and I'll go through a lot of this, essentially. I got my bachelor's degree in anthropology in 2010 at the University of Central Florida. I also got a master's degree in 2014. But I was always interested in Latin American studies, essentially, right? So I really liked anthropology. I liked everything that came with it. I liked all kinds of social sciences. I got the opportunity to work in Belize and Oaxaca, and when I did that, I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. For sure, I want to be an archaeologist, no question. But ultimately, really what it was is I just really liked working in Latin America. That was like my favorite part, just being there, getting to speak Spanish, and it was just awesome for me, right? But always doing archaeology. But then I began my Ph.D. program in 2014, and I switched to working in specifically Guatemala, so from Belize and Oaxaca, working in Guatemala, working on a project that's very much like community-based, and that's what Dr. Woodfield, Brent, it was under his project, which I really, really loved, right? So it wasn't just doing archaeology. I would walk, both of us, we'd work with local indigenous leaders and ethnographers to kind of help with other kinds of initiatives that communities needed, right? Oftentimes what they need isn't necessarily archaeology, they need new water filters, they need doctors to come out and do some like eye exams or something, right? Like there's other things that communities really need, but as like scientists, as folks who care about ethics and care about communities in general, we Brent set up this program to initiate like providing all of these services. And I love that, right? Like I was really interested in that. And so for my dissertation, I was an archaeologist, but I focused on GIS as well. So Brent bought a drone, which he has, And we would fly the drone around, and I would do all kinds of analysis focused on like water management essentially, and just not just in the past, but also in the present, right? So kind of like combining ethnography and archaeology, which we can call ethnoarchaeology as well. So I was really interested in that, and I've always just been interested more and more in ethnography, and always technology, right? Like ethnography and technology, really interested in both of those. But then I got my PhD in 2020, and 2020 was kind of a nightmare for, I think, all of us, right? And so it was just really hard, and it's always been a nightmare to find an academic job. So when I graduated, I had applied to 5 academic jobs, and I got shortlisted for 3, but I didn't get any of those, I got rejected. But if you ask any professor, anyone, they'd say, that's great, you applied to 5 and you got 3 shortlists? But I was like, yeah, but I still don't have a job, right? So like, this isn't that great, right? So while that was happening, I was kind of working part-time as in cultural resources management, which is CRM, which is basically like private archaeology. And then a friend of mine told me about a job in St. Louis, which is where I did my PhD at WashU. And I applied on a Tuesday, got called for an interview Wednesday, did the interview Thursday, got an offer Friday. And I was like, I can't do academia. This was so fast. I was like, and it was a good salary, right? I was like, this is great. I was like, yeah, I think I'm done with academic work. But I was always interested in ethnography and doing something just like working with people, right? Like I still love archaeology always, but I wanted to do that a little bit. And so in 2022, I got the opportunity to, through networking essentially. So at the time, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, her best friend works at Google. And so she was also an archaeologist, but she needed some help for some contract work, like writing language reports for Google. Essentially like language reports so they can see how they can like improve keyboards across the world, essentially, right? So as you know, this is an American keyboard. Y'all are using kind of an American language keyboards when you're typing, but there's also like British English keyboards, there's Latin American Spanish, there's Spain Spanish keyboards. So they wanted to know like, well, if we're gonna go to Taiwan, what kind of keyboard are they okay with mainland China keyboards? Do they want something different? Like, these are the kind of things that a social researcher can start working on, right? And then, so she was writing reports for that, and then they asked, we're gonna need reports now for Latin America. Do you know anybody who's worked in Mexico and can write a language report? So yes, me, right? Like I can do this, right? And so I started doing contract work for Google that way, and then shortly after I found a full-time job working in UX, like just full-time, and it was great. I put business ethnography because there's all kinds of terms you'll hear, but because like it was kind of UX, I'll just call it business ethnography, right? Like that's what I was doing. And then in 2024 at a previous company, I got promoted to more of a lead position for conservation apps and systems. So I was basically consulting for the USDA, the NRCS. You may have heard of the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, just working on like scientific applications. Part of the reason I got hired was because I now have a little bit of UX background, but like I said, I flew drones with Brent, right? I know about these kinds of apps. I know about GIS, right? And I have that social background, right? So it was like, this is the guy we want, and it worked out. Again, I worked really hard to get here, but I also got really lucky. Like I was able to seek out opportunities that fit. Last year things were crazy, as you know, with Doge and the furloughs for lots of folks. So I got furloughed. That was a wild time. That happens when when in the private sector and in the federal sector too, actually. But then, now I'm going to be starting a new position as a design research manager, and it'll be in healthcare services, which I don't really have experience in, but it's more like I have a wide breadth of research experience, right? And so that's really what's allowed me to apply for these kinds of jobs, right? And then this is a photo of me when I was actually my master's student in Oaxaca, doing archaeology, just sifting through, looking for artifacts. This is, I was with an ethnographer, a good friend of ours, and we were providing water filters to communities, and this is at a classroom, and one of the girls is just giving thanks to us for providing the water filter, but also she's actually really explaining the importance of a water filter for these indigenous communities. This is just a silly photo with us. There's great Brent in the middle at a fair in Guatemala. And here I'm doing what's called affinity mapping. So I heard earlier a student of Brent talking about like doing interview transcriptions and stuff. I don't do much of that. We do something that's called affinity mapping, which is I'll take notes from interviews and put them on sticky notes on a board. But you can do that online too, right? Like depending on where you're working, some people like to do it all manual, but if you're working like a remote job, you can do that online too. And so I'm there with a colleague of mine, just like organizing user interview notes. Okay, so what is UX? Let's keep on going. So UX is just all aspects of an end user's interactions within an organization, its services, and its products. So we say services because a UX researcher, I guess by the most strict definition would be like for products, for apps, software. So you're making whatever kind of apps Facebook, right, say, or Instagram, TikTok, making it a little bit better, I guess, for users. But it could also be a service or an organization, as in like what do folks think about Apple, right? Like what are your perspectives on it, right? What do you think about? I don't know if you guys have like Ross and Marshalls and everything out here, probably, right? They're all over the country, right? So like, what's your perspective on Ross versus TJ Maxx versus Walmart versus Target, right? Like we all have our ideas of what each bring, right? Like in terms of cost, class, right? All that. Organizations do care about that, right? They care about what their brand image is like. And so sometimes that's included in here. And then whenever you say user or end user, that's a person who uses a service or a product, right? We call them users. Sometimes we'll say customers, consumers. Again, those are synonyms, jargon, it's fine, whatever. Some people like to argue about those things. I don't. I'm like, whatever you want. If you pay me, you tell me what you want me to say. That's fine. But an experience, here, very simply defined, just an event or an encounter that will leave an impression on and impacts a person, right? So like, how does using a bad app impact you, right? Can it hurt, right? Or do you love it? What's your impression about it, right? So that's what we mean by that. And then in UX as a field, and I'll go through the different kinds of UX folks. As a field, there's a process. So the UX process, right, when we're thinking about creating an app, we want to discover the needs, right? Like why, this isn't always the case, but you create a tool, or a tool is used to solve a problem, right? Whether it's a digital tool or a manual tool, right? You're gonna nail something on the wall, right? It's like you're solving an issue, right? Like, so you have to discover what's that issue, explore options to what we're gonna create, test, like, does this actually work? And then listen for feedback, like, hey, like, this works, but like now that we're selling it, is it actually something you really need? Is there something better we can provide? Right? So that's like a brief process. I'm gonna go through a more detailed research process as well. The goals of UX, so what's the purpose of working in UX, right? It's like, one, you wanna have positive user impact. You wanna meet users' needs, and you want to, again, like I said, solve their problems, right? Improve their experience, right? With the service, with a product, with a company. So I have here this little diagram here. It's like, so you want to make sure it's usable, right? Can you actually use it, first of all? Like, is it something someone can use? But then you have like, what do people think about it? And how do they feel when they use it as well, right? All of these can be part of UX. You want to ensure good design and collaborative design. Essentially, you want to make sure that you can collaborate the designing of a product with the person actually coding or building the product itself too, right? So you have researchers, designers, engineers, data scientists, managers, business folks, right? It's this collaborative aspect is extremely important. And then there's ethical engagement. So ideally, you don't want to harm folks when you're creating apps and products. You want to protect the user privacy, and you want to avoid dark patterns. So now, of course, not all companies do this, and there's probably really famous ones you could probably think of that don't avoid dark patterns. Dark patterns is basically things like making people more addicted to their phones, right? We all know that there are apps and there are things that do that, right? That's not, I don't work in that. I've never worked in that kind of like space. And yeah, so that's something really important to consider when working in UX. So sometimes you'll hear other terms that go beyond apps and software, but it's all very related, and sometimes like it's like almost the same thing, it's just a different term. You'll hear hardware interface design, working in that field. So that's like touch screens, buttons, wearables, right? Like watches, like smart watches and stuff, exactly, yes. GPS units, sometimes it's things that have both, right? Software and hardware. Like a GPS unit, it's very important to have really good software. But the hardware has to be great because you're going to be going to the desert or you're going to be going to the jungle, right? So you got to make sure these things work. Service design is another term. I'm technically going to be working in service design next week. But it's like orchestrating the experience of entire service, right? So it's like if you're working at a bank, and let's say I want to start a new bank and I have to start a new call center, right? Because I'm sure we've all called folks for like troubleshootings with your financial issues or such, right? So it's not just like improving the call center, like the phone calls. So it's like improving how that phone call happens, but also the apps and software that the call center employee is using, but also maybe what you're using on your end, like when you're using your banking app, how does that look like? So it's like designing all of those things together, right? Like everything that you see and everything you don't see as well, that other people might be using, but you might not be using, right? So making sure all of that works together. That's called service design. And then there's another term called CX, or customer experience. Sometimes it's just used interchangeably with UX. But really, like the official thing is, this is back to like improving brand and company loyalty and satisfaction. So again, just not thinking about like, is this button make sense? It's more of like, does this entire company make sense to you? Like, what do you think about when you think about Apple? Like, are you thinking about iPhones, like good iPhones that work, or are you thinking about no, their phones are terrible. Like, I don't want to use it, right? So it's like it's like a bigger picture kind of thing, but they're all very related. And so there are different kinds of UX practitioners. I'm a UX researcher, right? Because I'm a researcher in training. And what we do within this UX field is we conduct research to understand behaviors, the motivations behind users, the challenges that they face, and we try to identify opportunities for positive user impact, right? So we're just trying to find like, where are what we call pain points? Where are the pain points when you're using an app? Okay, we identify those and then we bring them to a team, right? So they can kind of solve it. We're not really solving it. We're investigating, right? We investigate the problems, then we hand it off, and hopefully other people can deal with that. So we do like interviews. We'll do something called usability testing, which is basically we just have users use like a prototype of an app and see how it works. Like, oh, does this make sense? And then they give us feedback. Surveys, right? I did a survey earlier for y'all, right? I just wanted to get just a perspective on what people are saying, right? User analytics, as you might know, really big companies that have a lot of money, they'll know how you navigate through an app, right? That's called user analytics. Like they can say, yes, you click here many times, you never click here though, right? And we want to wonder, how come you never click on this tab? And then that could be something I would investigate because I see it, because companies have all kinds of systems. They're all tracking your data, right? Like all these companies know everything you do, and they're all tracking your data. And then ethnography, of course, right? Literally, I was consulting for Bank of America, and I went to Phoenix at one of their call centers, and I couldn't bring a laptop, I couldn't take photos or videos, so I paper and pencil, just like writing down how call center employees interacted with people clients who call them and who are frustrated, right? And so like in that scenario, they were telling me, if globally at Bank of America, right, if we shave off 1 minute on average per call, they save about $1 million. So like that's really important, right? Like if you shave off a minute, so it's like we're trying to improve call center operations essentially.
Alex,
Yes.
can I interrupt just quick?
Sure.
So my psychology students might not know what ethnography is.
Sure.
It's come up a few times.
So in this case, I'll call it like participant observation. So if I sit down and interview you and say, what do you think about this app that I created, right? What are the problems with it? Or I can even say, hey, like I have this new app that we want to solve X problem, right? Like we want an app for finding food on campus, right? What are the kind of things that you're looking for? That would be an interview. Ethnography would be like, I'm gonna follow you around right before lunchtime, because that's when you're hungry and that's when you're looking for food. And then you take out your laptop, maybe you ask a friend where they're gonna go, and then I can like start seeing like, okay, So this person, this is what they do when they're hungry, and this is when they're frustrated because like they can't find really good food or something, right? So ethnography is like participant observation. So like I'm there with you, I'm more observing what you're doing. I might join you and try to do it myself too, right? Maybe in another instance, right, if you're using a drone, right, and I'm trying to work on a new drone, maybe I'll use the drone with you too, so I can get in your shoes and empathize with your problems and your successes too. Like, oh, this is really fun. Yeah, this part is not fun, right? And ethnography is great because that's where thank you for asking, because that's where the empathy comes from. Empathy is, people have talked rhetoric like in the news about like the lack of empathy, like that it shouldn't exist. Empathy is so important, not just for like humanity, but also like financially, like in a capitalistic world, empathy can be valuable, like financially valuable, because if I can understand the people I'm serving, I can compete and win, right? Like in a sense. So like, yeah, that's where you get empathy from. If I get in your shoes and try to understand what you're doing. Yeah, does that help? Great. Okay, so there's another field called UX designers, or another job title. These folks are different. They design, right? They create, prototypes. They create, visual, like a graphic designer as well. But they work closely with developers or like engineers, coders, right? Programmers to support implementations of solutions. So really good companies, or that have some money, right? They won't, a coder can probably create an app by themselves, but they don't have a design mindset. They don't have a researcher mindset. So like, they'll hire a designer to create the prototype of how it should look like, how users should use it. And then if it were all good to go, then they'll give it to the coder and then they'll build the app, right? So there's these things called like user flows. Basically, that's just a flow of like, okay, how do you use the app? So first you click on login, and I'll literally like, I can even put on a whiteboard, login, arrow, then they enter password, right? Like that's a user flow. Like just every step that someone takes in a service or an application, that's a flow. Visual design, right? Just how the app looks. Interaction design, how does it feel as you click through buttons and as you click through apps and products. And then prototyping, of course, right? Just like an example of what you ultimately want to create. There's content strategists. I actually would say a lot of folks in anthropology might be really good content strategists if you really like not just writing, but improving writing and like improving what is being said, basically. Like, so you plan and manage content. It can be written, visual, etc. To meet the user's needs, right, and support their business goals, right? So like, as you know, a lot of apps or like we all use specific jargon or specific terminology for specific kinds of things that we're doing, right? So it's really important for the voice of the app to all make sense. And so that's something that like a content person would do. So they may audit the content on a website to make sure, does it all flow? Does that all make sense and flow correctly? Content governance, that's more of like, when is this content outdated? Today, like with Dr. Woodfield's presentation, he talked about how some of these things he got from 2003, right? It's like, but he's the governor of his content, right? It's like, what is outdated, but what isn't, right? Like, does the 2003 stuff, is that still good? Yes, we're gonna keep it in. If it's not, he'll take it out, right? And he'll update it, right? That's governance, right? People with apps need to do that too, right? If you ever use a manual and it doesn't match the app, that's a horrible thing. And then information architecture. This is a complicated concept, but it's essentially like how everything is organized in the behind the scenes. It's the easiest way to think about it is like how a library organizes their books is kind of like information architecture. It's like the library of an app, essentially. And then there's something we call UX unicorns, and the problem with that is essentially some jobs want one person to do all of these things. So you just want to be careful, like whenever you see a job description and it describes everything here, we call those UX unicorns, and that's, hopefully you don't get trapped in that because it's just, a really good designer is not going to necessarily be a really good researcher or a content strategist, and so ultimately they will always be mad at you at that job, and that's like just a really bad business, basically. But the kind of things you're good at is like product management. It's just like being a good manager, doing research, doing design, and sometimes they even ask you to code, like software development, and that's just it's not ideal, to be honest. Okay, I won't go too fast, but I want to make sure I get through everything. So as you work in entry-level research, basically what you might be tasked to do is just do research and then analyze data, right? Your boss will say, hey, just like, can you do this usability test, create this survey, and then give me the results of this survey, right? That's what like you would do at an entry-level position. But as you gain more maturity in the job and just understand research a little bit better, maybe you get a master's degree while you're working, and then you get a promotion that way, then you can actually go through more of the research process, which is asking, you know how to ask a good research question. You know the business has a problem, but how are you gonna deal with it with the users of the product, right? Like asking really good research questions and coming up with a plan that makes sense, that doesn't take too long, because businesses don't want to pay for like a study that takes like 2 months, right? They want you to do it within like a week maybe, right? And then synthesizing the insights as well. So you can analyze the data, right, and just have the results, but synthesizing the data is like presenting it to a client, right? Presenting it to the managers as they're building an app. And then there's like following through, right? So as you're doing research and then people improve the services and product, are you tracking that? Are you going back and saying like, hey, how are things going? Is this still an issue? I researched this problem 2 months ago. How are you guys doing now, right? And then strategy, right? What are we going to research? What is it we are going to do? That's like the most mature level of like a senior researcher, or what they call a principal researcher as well. That's basically the full end-to-end research process. And this is more of a rhetorical questions, but as you see this, right, how would you compare this to like the scientific method, to just like a general social research methods? And how would you compare this to academic research processes, right? Like, yeah, because this is very applied, right? But in terms of academia, how would you compare this, right? Just thinking about how this is, like, yeah. To be a very successful UX researcher, there are a few other things, right? So one, I would say it's really important to use kind of these ethnographic skills in your day-to-day as well. In many ways, be an ethnographer of the company you're working at, because you're a social researcher, like that's like just innate, right? So learn and adapt to the work culture and the rhythms of delivering products, right? Engineers, coders, programmers, you're working in these like fields with all kinds of different people who have very different specialties, very different foci essentially, and just learn from them, learn what they like, learn how to work with them, and also make sure that you're providing these research insights incrementally, and make sure that all the work you do as a researcher, especially in UX, that it's actually being implemented. Make sure that the coders are using your work. That's a big problem. A lot of people are really intimidated when they work with coders, right? Because we feel like they're very intelligent, they're bright, they're like mathematicians, and they are, but they don't really have the soft skills to work in a team, or they may not have the skills of an anthropologist might have, who can empathize, right? Like that's not what they've been taught for their life, but that is what you all have been taught. So like, make sure you can get over that hump and make sure that people are actually listening to you. Build really strong relationships across departments and teams. You need to understand, your job is to understand users, but then you have to teach the team about those users, right? Like you're teaching these folks because you're not building apps and services, right? They are, so they need to understand. Find allies, right? People who you really like working with when you're on these teams, and just like make sure you follow through your work. Don't silo yourself to just work with researchers and UXers. Basically, just be very open-minded to working with all kinds of folks, because you never know who might really help you throughout your career as well. And silo meaning like, don't just like separate yourself from everyone, kind of just be very inclusive. And advocate for yourself and advocate for an ethical team. Practice empathy for the users, right? Sometimes we're building applications or products for folks with disabilities, right? And it's really important to have empathy for them, but also for yourself and for your colleagues too, because you may be working with very diverse, different kinds of people. And I promise you, if you do that, you'll get better at the job, and people will see that. People will say, no, we want this person we want to move them up the ladder because they know how to work in really great teams, right? Like we don't have to worry about them, right? That's a big part of business. It's like worrying if the person doing the job is actually doing their job. And so that's really important. And always evaluate standardized research processes. Make sure you have really good quality or work really hard. And yeah, essentially. Okay, any questions? Anybody have? A little bit of a whirlwind tour. Anything? Does it all kind of make sense? Yeah, cool. A little bit of a whirlwind tour. Anything? Does it all kind of make sense? Yeah, cool. All right, so I want to go through this case study because I kind of spent like 2.5 years working on scientific applications for the USDA, and so I just wanted to explain some of my learnings. Right? So this is like an example. This is a very specialized case, right? Because not everyone uses scientific apps, right? Like it's only if you're kind of like a scientist or a researcher, right? So I was essentially researching researchers, right? That was my job for like 2.5 years. Whenever you use some apps, the goal is to use it really quickly, right? If you're ever, trying to think what would be an app like that. If you're on Uber, right? You don't want to be in Uber all day. That's a bad idea, right? You want to get in the car, you want to leave because you have a destination. That app is so you can minimize the time you're on that app, right? Like how do we get everything going as quickly as possible, right? But there's this cool concept that I was reading about that's called time to science, and I kind of use this. Basically, when you're using scientific applications, you don't want to spend the whole time figuring out how to use the app. Scientists and researchers want to spend most of their time critically thinking, right? Like actually engaging with the purpose that they had. They want to decrease their time that they can get to do the science. So it's called time to science, right? You want to spend all your time thinking about the science, right? Like a philosopher, right? Like thinking about things, not troubleshooting an app, right? Or troubleshooting your drone, like that's not, you want to minimize that and spend all day looking at the beautiful map you made and thinking about what does that mean, right? So time to science is like a really good example, right? That like when I'm doing UX, that's something I have to think about with the users, right? Oh, I wrote it here. The goal is to reduce the time a scientist or researcher takes to answer their question. Scientists and researchers really care about their data, but they also have to make sure they can trust their data, right? So if you're collecting really complicated data, can you trust it? What about the data you obtain from public websites? How do you know that's actually really good, right? So like that's something a lot of people are deeply critically thinking and are just researchers, something they care about a lot. Can you trust calculations you made in software such as like R, ArcGIS, SPSS? Have y'all ever used these software? Like any of these basically? Yeah, like, you would want to make sure you can trust that, right? Like if I gave you a calculator and put, and you typed 1 + 1, if the answer is 4, you're never going to use that calculator, right? You're like, the calculator is broken. But what about in these complicated apps, right? You want to make sure so that was like the context I was working in. And so an example of this was, I was working with farmers and employees. Basically, farmers at the USDA can get money from them if they're involved in conservation agriculture, right? If they're doing sustainability, then the USDA will give them money, right? And I was looking to improve that relationship. How do we make this a little bit more seamless? Because it was very clunky, essentially. And, actually, I was doing this, but this study I'm going to share was someone else's study, I will say. But it's available, so it's just publicly available, because it is USDA. The studies I did were not publicly available, so I can't talk too much about them. But if afterward, I'm happy to talk about it. I just won't put it on the presentation. But this is very publicly available. So what they did was user interviews, field site visits, which is kind of like it's basically ethnography, right? They were looking at what was happening. And then they created a research report, and they did what we call data visualization. So data visualization is a big thing for all kinds of researchers. And so if anyone working in IT or business needs to understand like different kinds of data visualization. But I'll show some unique ones that are very specific to UX. So what does UX research look like? So we have these things called user personas, which is a composite representation of actual user groups based on real data from qualitative research. So if I interview and observe and do ethnography for 5 people, right, 5 different people, I can summarize it, but I can also summarize it by creating like a fake person, right? So it's like this person is a farmer, but everything out on here is just a summary of all of the folks I interviewed. So this includes like demographic behavior, and it's just like general information, but it is data, it's real. I just don't present it as data. I present it as what we call as a persona, basically. So it has like, what they like to do, their tasks, needs. It also has, it's a little bit blurry, so I apologize for that, but it has things like, what are their needs? What are problems that they're dealing with? What do they need to achieve as a farmer, right? Like it has all kinds of data, but it's just little bullet points, but all of that are summaries from the interviews and ethnography. I'll zoom into this next one here in a second though, into both of them actually. The second one's called a journey map. So this is a visual story of a user's like one task, like one journey that they go through with your product or service you're providing. It includes things like the things that they're thinking and feeling. It's like a persona in which they're grounded in qualitative research, but we're just doing a full walkthrough, right? So, actually, let me go to that one because that one's a little bit more interesting. This one I think is pretty easy to understand, but if you have questions, please let me know. This is so important. If you can do this, you're a UXer basically. It looks complicated, but it actually isn't, right? They made a complicated version basically, but this is an example, right? So this is like getting direct farm loans, customer journey map, right? I have my thingy here. So basically it's like they have awareness of these loans and everything in red, all these little red boxes are pain points, all the problems about finding out, how do I get a loan? Like before even starting, like they already have a lot of issues trying to understand. When they're applying for loans, you see all those red boxes, those are all pain points, right? And then, processing loans, decision, it goes through the entire process of getting a loan, right? And so in yellow is like just other comments. Everything here in green is just the exact steps. Like this is how the steps work when you get a loan, right? And then on the bottom is the loan officer, the USDA employee's perspective of the loan as well, right? Because you're always interacting with other people, right? So if you're getting a loan, how does the employee process these loans, right? And as you can see, like, they have their own journey, right? And then there's major pain points, and so it has all kinds of information, and then you take that information, you give it to a designer, and hopefully you collaborate with the designer, and they'll create like, okay, here's what we're gonna design a little differently to alleviate, these two things. And then we're gonna take these and we're gonna alleviate these problems, right? So that's essentially how this kind of works. I know it's a little bit crazy looking, but feel free if you have any questions to ask me. But we also do presentations to clients, right? But we don't do necessarily what a lot of academics might do with the presentations, right? Because like they'll speak for 15 minutes or they'll speak for an hour on a topic, right? With 40 slides or so. Here, a client wants one slide, right? They just want to know like what did you see? What do you recommend? What kind of solutions do you think might start working, right? So it's like quick to the point. There's no need for a full thesis, right? They don't want to see that, right? You can have it in your head, have it in your notes and stuff, but what you share with them is just the quick information, right? Quick summary. And then here's an example of providing direction. You also want to help the teams when you're in UX, right? So it's like, I have the key findings and I have some solutions, but I will create an entire slide of just a solution, right? And this is like an example, like recommended technology improvements, right? So some of the things that's said here is like, offer live chat help option for producers, right? For farmers. So if farmers have questions, let's incorporate a live chat, right? Like, so that's an example of like a recommendation, right? Okay, cool. So that's basically most of the talk. How much more time do we have, you think?
Should be done by 9.
By 9? Okay. I did want to just share two more things, like just depending on how much time. So let's see the responses, right? So I've never used Google Forms to do surveys, but it's not that hard, and it's you can already see, like, if this was important for like Winthrop administration, like I can share the results, right? Like here's the results, right? Like I go to the responses, it already has a summary, right? So this is a little bit obvious, right? 6 responses, mostly students, there's 1 faculty member, right? Realistically, what do people, yes?
There are two someone didn't fill out.
Well, someone.
The samples, this is a sample size, this is not the population then, right? The population is bigger, but the sample was smaller, right? Exactly, so, but yeah, okay, so this is who filled it out, right? And again, this actually gets to why I don't like quantitative information, because qualitative is better, honestly, in UX. Like, it's more important, overwhelmingly. Most jobs really require qualitative. Realistically, what would be a good starting salary? Again, this is anonymous, right? So I don't know who put what, but yeah, most people say actually 60 to 90K. That's very interesting. That would be good. So the 30 to 60K is a little too low. I don't think anyone put 125 plus, which is, yeah, that's probably a little bit unrealistic, right, for a starting salary after a bachelor's, but it makes sense, right? Have you had conversations with faculty, students regarding career options? Most folks said none, very little, often. Okay, good to know, right? Like most folks then say, yeah, it's very little. They don't really talk about that. Okay. Do you know about UX? Yes, I've heard a lot about. Okay, that makes sense, right? There's a class here, kind of, but I don't really get what it is. Nope, I have no clue what this is. Hopefully, this minimizes, really eliminates after this talk. Yeah, but good to know. So, yeah, if anyone wants these results, just let me know. I'm happy to send it to the professors, right? This is data. It's not official, but this is data, right? This is what people are saying about career stuff. Okay, so with that, let me go to a career ladder. So let's just talk through this, because I think this is very important. This may be very illuminating. So this is also, it's called the UX career ladder, but this is really UX research career ladder. So it's more actually relevant to all of us. It's not for designers or content strategists or anyone else. There are different levels when you apply for jobs, and they'll use these different terms. Again, everyone does things their own way ultimately, but generally they go from like intern all the way to principal and up. And those are what we call individual contributor. So again, this is not just a UX term, this is a business or a information technology term. Like if you're working in IT, you'll hear these terms. Individual contributor means you actually do work. People leadership means you're a manager and you're helping others do work, right? Like you're a manager, right? And so I'll share all of this, right? But what's interesting here next is the top disciplines, right? So it's a little small, so I apologize you can't see. I did put the link up there if you want to copy it, write it down, and look at this later. 70% get degrees in psychology, 45% in HCI, which is human-computer interactions, 40% human factors. So human-computer interaction, that's like very UX, right? That's kind of like UX. Human factors is like ergonomics. It's like making sure things feel good. But sometimes there's a software component, and then that's also kind of UX. But it's very similar, very similar. And then anthropology, right, which is 26 or 28%. I'll just read it here. And then for people leadership, what people, when they go into like becoming a manager and stuff, what do they get? It's actually very similar, right? 50% in psych, HCI 40, human factors 34, anthropology 17%. So less, but as you can see, it's still, those are the top degrees people get when they go into this field. So the responsibilities here, focusing on executing research, work around the research. So this is like doing research, doing the things that are not research but helps research get facilitated. Collaboration with non-UX folks, like collaborating with coders, and mentorship, right? It's very high, always on executing research, but it gets like higher on kind of like these two things as you move up the ladder, essentially, right? You become more and more like work around the research. This isn't that important really, it's just the breakdown of like the levels of, actually this is really important, like do you need a master's to work in UX or not, right? Well, as you can see, like most people, a bachelor's is definitely very important. A lot of people do have doctorates, which is interesting because they're really good researchers, right? If you get a Ph.D., you've worked through a lot of the ways to create your own project, right? And so you understand how to work in that full research space. So you do see a lot of doctors. But what's interesting is you see it a lot in the entry level too, right? It's oftentimes people like me who decided not to go into academia after the PhD and then go into the private sector. Okay, now the good stuff, right? Okay, so what are the salaries like as of 2020? This is like 2024, but it's about the same, right? So an intern makes between like 63 to 82K. a year. So that kind of matches what y'all were talking about, what y'all said, which is good. Okay, that's more or less a salary. And if we go all the way to the top, based on the data, the salary range is between $160K to $240,000 a year. I will tell you, it's very rare to get the 240K. You have to basically be the best researcher at Google or Apple or Amazon. Most of the jobs are on the lower end of that, right? And in people leadership, if you dissect this a little bit, just because you're a manager doesn't actually mean you're gonna make more than an actual researcher, because it's still really hard to find really good researchers. So they're still gonna pay them really well. But I'll say also, most of these jobs are on the lower end, I'm not gonna lie to you. So anywhere, like when it says lead, 136K to 185, most people are getting paid on that lower end, okay? So that's just something really important to know. But yeah, this is part of why people really like the UX field, because like the salaries can be really lucrative, right? Like as you go up the ladder, okay? Good researchers, so they're still gonna pay them really well. But I'll say also, most of these jobs are on the lower end, I'm not gonna lie to you. So anywhere, like when it says lead, 136K to 185, most people are getting paid on that lower end, okay? So that's just something really important to know. But yeah, this is part of why people really like the UX field, because like the salaries can be really lucrative, right? Like as you go up the ladder, okay? And so yeah, to end here, UX research is a key step in creating apps, websites, and systems. We improve technologies and processes for people, for users. And we enable organizations, right? We enable companies to make data-informed decisions. I didn't use that term, like data-informed or data-driven, but it's ethnographic, right? It's a lot of qualitative, but that's data. That's data. And we can help people decide on how they're gonna move forward, right? That's a really important thing. And just like in academic research, UXers, as you work in your field, you have to become experts, right? I have to become an expert of researching researchers, right? Like it's just like, in that way it's very similar to academia. And like in my example, I helped scientists focus on interpreting and analyzing data. So that's all of it. How much time do we have? Are we done? Or?
Yeah, we can go for maybe another 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I was thinking maybe I can show you guys how that looks like in practice. And I can do it in 10 minutes, okay? I'll do, let's say 7 minutes, I'll do 6 minutes here, right? So has anyone here ever used an online collaboration or whiteboard tool? Do you know what that is? This is really important when you're working in business.
Figma?
FigJam?
FigJam.
Yeah. So Figma, FigJam is an example of that. This is Miro. I'm just more used to Miro. FigJam is probably way better. I just don't use it often. This is a digital whiteboard, okay? So in here I have like just boards, and then I have like sticky notes, right? So it's like, and then you share links to each other so you can all collaborate at once. And that's something that's really important when working in product teams, like building apps. It's really important in a lot of businesses. And it's really important when you have a remote job. Most remote jobs, you're gonna have something like this because you're not working in an office, you don't have any whiteboard, so you're using something digital, right? So I strongly suggest using something like this if you're doing an undergrad thesis or some kind of project with other folks, because you can collaborate together live, all with your laptops together, and it's really, really easy to use. So I wanna do a little bit of a kind of an example study here. Here's like a user interview I did in the past. And then these are like little sticky notes that I have when I asked users specific questions, and this is like the kind of things they said. So why don't I go ahead and start? I only have like 6 minutes. I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm gonna try my best, but I've been thinking a lot about cloud and like, online collaboration. And I want to pretend I am I work for Google, and I want everyone here to start using Google Drive, and I want everyone here to start using Google Docs to collaborate with their professors. When I was an undergrad, a lot of times I would see folks like download their documents and say final draft revision 17,100, right? That was very common. at this day and age, we should all just use Google Docs, okay? In my opinion, because I work for Google, right? And I want you guys to collaborate, right? I want to understand how you collaborate, and then we're gonna do a quick workshop, and you'll be the users, and I'll be the researcher, okay? And anyone can answer. Right? I have a section here for faculty and students. So if you don't mind, I'd like to know, and anyone please feel free to speak. What kind of assignments do professors, let me start. I'm gonna do 5 because I've been talking. What kind of assignments do professors review for you? Like, so like I just don't understand because I'm not a student anymore. How do professors review your work, I guess? What do you guys use?
Blackboard.
You use Blackboard? Okay. And then what kind of assignments do they review? Like, yeah, I just want to hear what anyone says. It's okay if you're stuck, it's okay. Just
I feel like mostly essays.
essays?
Yeah.
Okay, essays.
Anything with like written submissions, because if it's like
homework PDFs.
yeah, because if it's quizzes or something like that, they usually get automatically graded by like whatever system it's through.
Okay. And these written submissions, is it a one-time grading thing, or can you like go back and forth reviewing with each other, or how does that work?
It kind of depends on the class. For my writing classes, it's kind of like you submit your thesis and like kind of an outline, and they'll give you feedback on that. But there's like a final submission, and that's the whole essay. And you can't really like turn in a different version. But for my psychology classes, it can be different.
Okay, can you explain that a little bit again? Can you tell me what that process is like?
Just an experience with my writing classes. So if I had a paper to write, it would be due like 2 weeks from when it was originally signed. So within that first week, I'd be able to like submit my thesis or like an outline of the paper and get feedback on how that's like supposedly going to look. And then I take that feedback for the final draft, and that's what I submit, and that's what gets graded. And unless there's some kind of like weird circumstance around it, I usually can't resubmit it.
Yeah, usually like what you said, you can do it as many times as you want until the due date.
But do you work with the professor many times, or is it just that one time?
You can, it can be both. Like for some of my classes, I've been able to do it, and if I like realize a day later that I missed something or something was wrong, I can go back and resubmit it. But it also depends on the teacher. Some teachers don't let you have any other submissions.
Right. Are there any challenges that happen when you're doing these like resubmissions, or like anything that's like frustrating?
I think that we don't, or at least for me, we don't type it unless it's a discussion board. It's not typed directly into Blackboard. You usually do it on like Word and then save it and then turn it into Blackboard.
Is that the case for others too? Is that how that works? Okay. Okay. Does that mean you have to download it onto your laptops? Okay.
And then a lot of times the teacher would be like, I can't see this, you downloaded it wrong, try again.
Okay. Okay, cool. Anything else that might be interesting that you want to say or regarding this process? Okay, if there's not, we have very little time now. So okay, great. So let's say that would be me doing a user interview with you guys, right? So at first, I'm very messy, so I apologize. But like I had all these questions, right, that I had here. I didn't get, like preferred way to communicate. We don't have time, right? But I would also not do a focus group because those are really biased, right? Because some people talk, some people don't. People who are shy won't talk, so focus groups are companies that want to save money do them, but then they suffer in the end, right? Like the apps get worse. So let's do a journey map. It'll be real quick, right? So the journey is right here. It looks like there's 3 steps, right? So let me just put this up here. Step 1 was like, sorry, it's really small. Let me go in. Was what? Submit, outline. Step 2 was, well, actually submit outline. Then you get feedback. Get feedback. Then you take feedback. Like you make changes, right? Make changes. And I'm not gonna create, well actually I will. So then the next step is make changes, submit, and then here, let's see. So, will this work? No, okay, it's the same color. Let me just change that color. And then get grade or something like that, final grade. And then that's like the process. And then I would say, that's the step, that's kind of the action too. I'm gonna skip this row here, but the pain points I would put here. So like, let me put here, something like that, right? I will put it down here. And then it's clear that there are like pain points you've experienced, right? This is very messy because I'm doing this in like 2 minutes, right? So it wouldn't be this messy, but I would eventually, you know, I didn't get that much information. So if this was a real job and I worked for Google, I would ask another group of folks again. I would maybe do 2 or 3 times. I would fully fill this out. And then I would go to Google and say, all right, here's what I learned. People are downloading it offline, and you, as a company, the whole goal is to do everything in the cloud. So how do you as a designer, like what we need to focus on is like, how do we at least right now solve the easiest pain point, which could be downloaded something wrong, right? Downloading something wrong, can you as a coder fix it so that they don't do that, right? Like, how do we do that, right? You're the coder, you're a genius, right? Like, let's work together to make sure we solve that. And then I'll come back to you and say, hey, can you try downloading it how you did before? And do you experience that same problem? If you do, we have to keep on going and figuring this out. So that's a day in the life, basically. So that is the end of my presentation now. Just wanted to show you what it looks like to do UX and what more. And just thank you all for your time. If you have any other questions, if you'd like to, I'm very corporate now, so I have a LinkedIn. If you want to connect, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have my email there as well. So thank you. Appreciate it. Anything?
Any questions, comments, concerns?
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
absolutely.